Hello friends, this is Swaroop. Welcome to another tutorial in the C programming series. In the last video we have already covered how two-dimensional arrays work in C programming. So in this tutorial we'll build upon that by seeing how we can work with two-dimensional arrays as part of a program. So we'll see how we can create two-dimensional arrays, we'll see how we add elements to it, and we'll also see how we can access elements from a two-dimensional array. So let's get started. So as we have already discussed in the last video, two-dimensional arrays represent a matrix. So let's say you have a matrix like this, a two-dimensional 2 by 2 matrix with elements 1, 2, 3, 4. Now to represent that as a two-dimensional array in C, you would do something like this. Now since all the elements in this array are integers, we'll say int, and some array name, I'll just say my array, and you have to give two two square brackets representing rows and columns. So in this matrix that we are trying to build, we have 2 rows and 2 columns, so we will just put 2 and 2 for both of them. So what this represents is that my array is a two-dimensional array with 2 rows and 2 columns, just like the way we want it. Now we have to put the values 1, 2, 3, 4 into this array. So how are we going to do that? So the way will do that in C is by representing each row of the matrix as an array. So what I mean by that is you will say 1, 2 like this and 3, 4. This is one way of representing that two-dimensional matrix as a two-dimensional array in a C program. Okay, so let's break it down. So the way we represent a matrix in a C program is by breaking down every row as a single element. So in a two-dimensional array, we'll consider each row as a one-dimensional matrix. And if you remember from the one-dimensional matrix tutorial, this is how you represent a 1D array. So 1, 2, which is row 1, becomes the element 1 in this two-dimensional array. And similarly, the row 2, which is represented by this one-dimensional array 3, 4, becomes the second element in this matrix. So this is one way of doing this. Now to make sure that this is actually working, let's try to print an element from this matrix. Now we do that with printf and we access an element. So let's say I want to print the first element of the second row. The way we do that is we'll say row 1 and element 0. And remember, this is 0 index based, so second row actually gets indexed as 1 and first element is indexed as element 0. So now if you run this program, we'll see that we actually do get 3. So this is working. So this is one way of representing a two-dimensional array in a matrix. And just to recap this, the way we do this here is by breaking down a matrix into one-dimensional linear arrays and representing each of them as a single element in this array. So 1, 2, which is a one-dimensional array, becomes an element in the array, and similarly 3, 4 also becomes an array. So this representation is basically symbolic of the way C handles two-dimensional arrays, which is what we call as an array of arrays. So this representation, which is an array, is comprised of these one-dimensional arrays. So that is how C internally represents them. So a two-dimensional array is nothing but an array of individual arrays, and this concept can be extended to further as well. So similar for 3, 4 and n-dimensional arrays. Now, this is, as I said, this is one way of doing it. C provides us with another way of doing, another way of declaring two-dimensional array as well. That is even simpler than this, and there what we do is just list down all the elements like that. Now, this basically looks like a one-dimensional array if you remember from that. And we're trying to put it in a two-dimensional array. So you might be wondering what's exactly happening and how does C understand that it has to break this down into two-dimensional arrays with 2 rows and 2 columns. All this magic lies in the value you give for the columns. So here we have said we need 2 columns. So C understands that you are representing an n-dimensional matrix, and in our case a 2-dimensional matrix, and breaks down this list every 2 elements at once. So it understands that the first 2 elements, 1 and 2, represent row 1, and the next 2 elements will represent row 2, and so on. So if we had more elements, let's say 5, 6, and 7, 8, all of those values will also be broken down into individual rows. So that is how C interprets this. So even though you're actually showing this as a one-dimensional array, C understands that since you're putting that into a two-dimensional array, this has to be a two-dimensional array as well. And it automatically infers how the structure should look like. Let's run the program again, and we should also see 3 just like the way we have seen the last time. So even with this way of declaration, you will end up with the same matrix, two-dimensional matrix in the memory. So I've told you that the way C understands that this is a two-dimensional matrix and breaks it down is based on the number you give here, which is the number of columns. So you might be wondering, why doesn't it use this? So in C, the number of rows, and in general as well, the number of rows is kind of optional. So as long as you know when to break this list, you don't actually need the number of rows because it can be inferred accordingly. For example, let's say I don't give anything here. So I just leave this, the rows element as blank. Now you might be wondering, how does it understand it? There has to be, how does it infer the number of rows? So it's simple. It breaks down this list 2 elements at once, so 1, 2, and 3, 4, and it automatically figures out that there are only 2 sets of such elements, so there has to be 2 rows. And so this kind of declaration works as well. So to prove that, again we run it, you can again see that we get 3 without any errors. So you can do this as well. Let's say you do something like this. You add another element, only one element this time. Now you might think that you will get a compile time error because you're trying to put 5 elements and it's expecting to break at every 2 elements, and you don't have another element after 5. Well, let's see what happens. You get the output without any errors. So what's happening? So when you do something like this, what C internally does is that after it understands that 1, 2 is row, the first row, 3, 4 is the second row, it comes to 5 and sees that there is no other element after 5 to put it into that row. But since you want 2 elements to be present in every row, that is 2 columns, it automatically adds a 0 at the end. So when you do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it actually is same as doing this. To see this in action, let's try to print out the value, this one. So if you do this, we should get 0 for the second value, and as you see, we're getting a 0. And if I do remove 0 from the declaration, it won't fail, but it will still give a 0 because it automatically puts a 0 there. Now you might be wondering what happens when you remove both the declarations of, that is, the number of rows and the columns. Well, it doesn't work. It just simply gives up because there is no way for it to understand how many rows or how many columns it has to have. And you will see that it will give an error, and that's what you get. So declaration multi-dimensional array must have bounds for all dimensions except the first. Yeah. So this also comes to, so as you can see, that's you get an error. So you can't do that. Now you might be wondering what happens if you put rows and not the columns. Now you will again get an error because it expects columns to be present all the time, but not the rows. Now, with the number of rows and not the columns given, it really doesn't know what to do with the extra elements in that case, and it doesn't even know how to break this. You might be wondering why it just doesn't do 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5 under 0. Now it could also have done 1, 2 and 3, 4, 5, or just 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are a lot of possible combinations in that, and obviously in a program you never want any ambiguity, and that's why C doesn't work when you don't give values for the columns value in a two-dimensional array. But the other way around obviously works, as we have seen. So that's how you work with two-dimensional arrays. Now let's say instead of accessing elements individually, you want to loop through the entire array and print the values. So we'll do a for loop, obviously just like the way we did with one-dimensional arrays, but the only catch here is that since we have 2 dimensions, you will have 2 for loops instead of 1. And these 2 for loops will be nested inside each other. So one for loop will be nested inside another one. Now, so the way that works would be, so we declare 2 loop variables, and we'll say I less than the number of rows, in our case that is 2, and so this is the first for loop, and as I said, I will have another for loop nested inside that. So this would go from 0 to columns, which is also 2 in our case, and like that. So with this, you have a way of accessing each and every element in this array. Now let's say I just want to print all the values. So I'll do printf \n, and I'll just say my array of I to j. So what this does is that I goes from 0 to 2 and j goes from 0 to 2 as well. So for every I, j goes from 0 to 2, and with that you get all the possible I and j combinations. So you have 0, 0, 0, 1 and so on, all the way till 1, 1. And with that it prints all the elements. So if we run this program, that should be a comma there. So if we run this math, you will see that it has printed all the elements down, 1, 2, 3, 4 as a column. Well, this is fine, but I would actually like for it to show them as a matrix instead of in a single column. So the way I will do that is, instead of having a new line character at the end of every print statement, we'll just do this. So that is, instead of starting on a new line every time, we just put a space and print the next character on the same line, and after every row we'll just print a \n, which is a new line character. So it prints 1 space 2 and then comes to the next line, and then it prints 3, 4, and it prints then it comes to a new line as well, and then we'll have 5 and 0, as you could expect. This would actually be 3, since we have 3 rows, not 2, so that would be 3. And yeah, now if you see, as you could expect, you will get 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, 0, which is what we would expect. So that is how you access array values through a loop. We'll have a two-dimensional array, so we have a nested for loop. So that's how you work with two-dimensional array. So that's all for this video. See you in the next one. Bye bye.